It was an assault on Europe. Elrok entered the market in the spring of this year and immediately became number one among electric cars in April, then number one in the Netherlands in May, and in Denmark he dominated the entire first half of the year. Similarly, unsurprisingly, in his home country, the Czech Republic. And the best part is that such a strong entry wasn't thanks to big discounts, but rather a mix of different talents: practicality, range, charging, and price. So let's take a closer look at this mix, and if you're new to my channel, my name is Zakharov. Let's get started. By the way, if you have trouble understanding the naming of modern Skoda models, here's a quick cheat sheet. Q at the end means SUV or crossover, like Kodiaq, Elrok, so SUVs, crossovers. On the other hand, E at the beginning means an electric-powered car, so E. No, that's also an SUV, just electric, and similarly, the Elrok we're testing today is also an electric SUV. That's enough theory, time to move on to practice. In practice, we have here a mid-sized electric SUV, which is roughly the equivalent of the Elrok in terms of size. Of course, the Elrok is basically a dinosaur by now, since it's been on the market since 2017. Can you tell by looking at it? So Elrok also shows what the new generation of the Elrok might look like someday, cohesive and proportional. And from what I've seen on the internet, even the biggest skeptics of electric cars admit that this body is simply good. Good in the sense of looking nice, but also good in the sense of being well thought out. The drag coefficient is 0.26. For a crossover, that's really okay. And look, they managed to do it without retractable door handles. There's something to grab onto. Anyway, generally speaking, Elrok looks quite conventional for an electric car, because let's remember, it's from the same family as Volkswagen's ID series, which practically scream that they're electric. And here, look, we have a body that you could just as well put a Elrok Mark II badge on. When I open the hood, I feel a bit disappointed, because since the drive is in the back in this version at least, what was stopping them from making some space for a frunk up here in the front? In the back? 286 horsepower, 545 Nm. The car does 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. And here, depending on our pace, it can be much less or a bit less. For example, at 120 on the highway, this car uses 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which gives it a range, well, on the highway, let's say, a little under 400 kilometers. Let's move on to the interior of Elrok and maybe start with the design. Look at how unusual these shapes are, this cockpit. It's very deep, actually, from this starting point all the way to the end. Well, I think we have, I don't know, about 70 centimeters. This windowsill is very long and very unusual, because we have a layer, another one, and another, and it keeps going. And here everything is tied together by a line that goes all the way around, running from door to door. All of this makes for a pretty cool, twisted, well thought out, but also very twisted, multi-layered design. Notice this piece of plastic, whose only job, it's not a display, its only job is to shield my eyes from the hole, because there's a huge head-up display there. The Czechs decided it wasn't appropriate to have such a hole in front of your eyes, but for someone who's 2 meters tall, it still doesn't work. I can still see some of it. Anyway, it's nice that they thought about it, and actually it even makes sense. When it comes to materials, up here it's hard, behind this plastic it's hard, but in front of this plastic it's soft, and actually it's really, really soft. Look, while we're at it, let's admire this little socket, let's call it, for a tiny screen, which in terms of size is probably really comparable to the first smartphones. And well, someone decided that this is enough, and in fact it is enough. We don't need to see much here. The large head-up display shows everything essential, so only the bare minimum is displayed here. But I appreciate that even for such a small screen, someone made this kind of socket, and it looks very familiar, recognizable, and it's also shaded, so it really makes sense. Down here we have a kind of cover, even quite a bit of foam underneath, nice orange stitching. Here further on there's another layer of a different looking material than something pretending to be aluminum. Of course it's plastic, and finally an LED strip, and then it's hard from there on. It's that classic, so to speak, automotive plastic. My dear friends, the partner of this episode is WEHISPL, which is a car platform where more than 10,000 new and used cars are available. The platform cooperates with dealers of all brands, from the popular ones, like in this case, to the most expensive ones. With the code Zakharov, you'll get a deal on WEHIS PL an additional 1% discount, which in this case will be over 2,000 zlotys extra on top of the discounts already visible on the WEHIS website. You choose a car, calculate the installment, get a financial decision, and sign the contract 100% online, or if you prefer a traditional conversation, you can also do it with an advisor. Check the description where you'll find a link to thousands of cars you can lease. I warmly invite you. That's how it all looks on the door. The material is also soft, although it's not as nice or pleasant to the touch anymore. And here we go down again with eco leather, smoothly to the level of the armrest, which is well hard. It's not super comfortable, but the one on the right actually is. It's pretty nice. We can adjust its height, but unfortunately not the front or back. Of everything I've said, I like it all. Someone worked hard to make it nice here. But they forgot one detail, that I won't be touching this very often, only while recording this video. I also don't need soft material. Here sometimes, okay, it might come in handy, but what will I be grabbing most often in this car? So tell me what, the handle, the door handle, it's just some kind of misunderstanding. Very crude, hard, ugly, uncomfortable, just some shallow plastic. Which generally for me in terms of feel, appearance and function is the weakest part of the whole thing. Probably there was no other way to arrange these doors to grab them somewhere else, so they had to go with this handle here. Okay, but make it out of, I don't know, some kind of soft material, anything to make it pleasant to the touch. After all, you grab this like 15 times a day. No, it's just weird, but okay. Let's move on to the storage compartments now. A huge compartment, a big bottle fits, everything fits. It's very deep, very well finished. It's flocked here too. Here we have spots for phones, and we also have 2 USB-C ports. It's not cooled, unfortunately, like it is in many cars these days. Here we have 2 tiny cup holders, really for small cups, but we can adjust them like this if needed. Now we have a small espresso and a big coffee, right? Clever, right? And we can adjust this too. Here we have another kind of compartment. Here we have a spot for small items like a little shelf, and under it another little shelf, and below that yet another shelf, and all of this can be opened and closed, and below we have even more. Generally this compartment isn't very big, but you have to admit its organization is simply exemplary. Oh, I just need to arrange this Tetris here the right way, even the little details like that. This compartment opens slowly inside, also finished fantastically. I mean, it's fantastic. It's not crocodile leather, but it's textured, so again, someone put some thought into it. And finally, there's a set of physical buttons for the basic functions, yes, but to access the climate control menu, I don't have to look for anything here. I have the right button here, click, and I have the climate control menu. Well, there's always something more. If there was a knob, I'd be over the moon. But I have to admit, here we can change the driving modes. All right, I'd have to start the car. Speaking of starting the car, it's a very simple and intuitive sequence. You just press the brake and the car is on. Thank you, we stop pressing the brake and the car is off. But if someone prefers the old way, no problem. This is the start-stop button, so we can turn it on if we want. Even if the brake isn't pressed, or even if the brake is pressed and it's ready to drive, we can turn it off here. It turns off. Oh no, actually you can't do it with the brake. Now you can. Now I finally figured out the logic, and that's it for the front. I would say it's generally a strong 4 with a strong plus, and the only thing missing for me to be completely happy is a better solution for this unfortunately very budget holder. And I haven't even pulled on it yet. Look, here we go, I'm pulling. Well, at least it's really solidly mounted. This plastic part moves. I haven't broken it off yet, but it feels like I might, to be honest. But at least it doesn't squeak, or at least it barely squeaks. Let's not exaggerate, it's fine here. Something started to squeak a bit. I'm pressing it more here, but you know, it's always the same, and here too, nothing dramatic. By the way, there's also another big storage compartment down here with a rubber mat at the bottom to make cleaning easier. Actually, it's a 2-part compartment. Here's the second part. Look, I'll show you one part, the other part, so how could I forget about that? They're pretty practical storage spaces too. So, well, still, 4+ is the max, considering this thing. And here's an interesting fact. Notice that on this gear shift lever, or the drive direction selector, we have the letters R, N, D, and B. B stands for brake, meaning energy recuperation, but there's no letter P here, like for parking. This is the second car I've seen where manufacturers seem to think the letter P is unnecessary. Because the parking mode is a mode that the car sets by itself when it determines that it's needed. So we arrive at our destination in drive mode, then we engage the handbrake, and that's it, we have parking mode. Why press any extra button? Or for example, when we're reversing, we arrive and then we turn off the engine, all the more so we turn everything off, so the parking mode becomes unnecessary. One less button, one less function. Basically, the only thing the driver has to do is forget about it. Because I don't think it's necessary, my friends, it's time for the 2-meter man test. But before I do that, I'll show you something that made me start questioning why those millions of cars were produced. It was all completely for nothing. People, all of humanity, spent decades learning how to open this little compartment here for coins. And then what did Skoda do? That handle was too complicated, maybe too cheap, maybe too old-fashioned, so they added a button. Do you see this? Why? Why is there a button here when you can just open it with a handle like we've been doing for 100 years? How long has Skoda been making cars? Why, after 101 years, did they decide that a button is needed here? I don't get it, but okay, let's move on to the 2-meter tall person test. Of course, I lowered the seat all the way down, and above my head I have 6. Even above my hand I'm missing 6 fingers. That's how much free space there is, so much room in this car. The range of steering wheel adjustment is fantastic, definitely enough for me to sit properly, and I am sitting correctly. I'm comfortable enough and also sitting low enough that I'm actually looking at the road through the lower half of the windshield, which really rarely happens. That means my line of sight is just below the rear view mirror. Where is the mirror under the mirror? I'm sitting here like in an aquarium, I can see everything. That's something that rarely happens, so real respect to whoever designed the seat position in such a way that even someone who's 2 meters tall can fit in here without the slightest problem. My only comment is that this fancy cockpit, which of course has 15 layers and all sorts of cool shapes, unfortunately in the spot where my right knee is, it sticks out a bit more than I would like. That doesn't mean I don't have room for my knee, but if it went a bit deeper, I wouldn't mind. That's my only comment. In the back, however, it's just right, almost a tight fit, but you can't say that there's 100 meters of space above your head. Yeah, just a little bit. There's still some space left in front of my knees, so yeah, just a little, but still with some room to spare. And finally, for the feet. I'd also say that I'm not forcing it in, there's not much room to spare, so for someone who's 2 meters tall, it's a pass, but just barely. However, not with as much space as there was in the front. Here I'm sitting much higher, noticeably higher than in the back. Just like in the front, I was looking at the world through the middle of the front windshield. In the back, I'm actually looking from under its upper edge. So it's a completely different place. But notice that I don't have my knees up to my chin either. Here the floor is low enough, so it was well thought out, well organized. This particular version is very well equipped. Here we have this pocket, that pocket, air vents, heating, a third climate zone, and all kinds of gadgets. Simply clever, which I will talk about separately later. However, I would like to point out 2 things. First, the materials in the front are like this, a bit softer, but here in the back they're completely hard. And the pockets in the doors, which are the front ones, so a big bottle of water, everything will fit in nicely, but in the front they're flocked. However, here we have plain plastic. However, whatever equipment could be added here has been added, so from a practical standpoint, this car, as Simply Clever Skoda, still rules. Besides, pay attention to these contoured seats. You could say this isn't a rear bench, but rather 2 nicely contoured seats, connected only by this area in between. Here we have, look, a nice armrest with cup holders, and here we have a ski pass-through. So when it comes to practicality, the only thing I miss here is the ability to slide the rear seat. Other than that, I think everything that should be here is here. It would also be nice to have that magic handle here, a little lever that could set the backrest at a certain angle. Here the rear seat isn't very flexible in that regard. Let's say we could have something better. And finally, the ISOFIX mount under these plastic covers is very easy to open, very easy to close, and very easily accessible. And finally, it's worth mentioning that this is a rich version, an expensive version, but you can really see it in this car. Even the seatbelt color is quite unique. Not black, actually, I don't know why it's red or maybe orange, but it definitely stands out from the crowd and also matches the stitching. So at least, even though we have a big amount on the bill, you can at least see where some of that money went in the car. And here we have the continuation of our whole Simply Clever set. So we have these interesting holders that, as you can see, can be used as holders, or they can just stay out of the way. Clever. And besides that, we have one more little shelf, and that's pretty much it. There are 2 USB-C ports there. I don't think I mentioned this, but the most important thing is that the space that is usually wasted is actually used here. Unless someone is supposed to sit in the back as a third person, no problem. Now we need to do something about it. We can, for example, throw it in the trunk, but if there's no one there, and usually there isn't, then we have a pretty simple, clever solution here. So kudos to the Czechs. And it's really a very obvious idea, after all, that no one thought of. The trunk, as is typical for Skoda, has to be very practical and spacious, and it is 470 liters measured according to European standards. So it's really, you can see it, it's a really spacious trunk, and just look at how it's organized. It's like a high bay warehouse with individual compartments going up vertically where you can put things like a fire extinguisher or other small items. Plus there are hooks, look, different kinds of hooks. We've got a solid hook like this, a small hook like that, a 12V outlet, another hook here and there, and even, look at this, a hook. Yes, a hook is no longer anything exotic in electric cars. Besides that, we're continuing with the topic of high storage. Here we store the charging cables in a special net under the shelf, and we can also go lower. If we're going vertical, let's go all the way. So under this special mat we get some extra compartments here, flat, but quite a few of them. They contain some interesting extra accessories like additional nets, or those classic Skoda solutions that let you arrange your luggage on the trunk floor so it doesn't slide around. And that's how we have the trunk organized without folding down the rear seat backs. Now, when we do fold them down, right at that moment, we get 1,580 liters of trunk capacity. The only comment I have about this setup is that it's not a flat floor. As you can see, there's a slight threshold there. And the trunk, as I mentioned. But look at the right side, such clever ideas on display. Here we have something like a hook, here we have something like a hook, here we have something like a hook, and here we have an actual hook. In addition, right, a pretty practical storage compartment, and clearly a place where we can set another level of the trunk. And here there was this little corner, and it's not really clear how to use it, but let's put an elastic band here and suddenly it becomes practical. So, is it possible? Yes, it is. How about that? By the way, have you noticed that the Skoda logo appears less and less often on Skoda cars? For some time now we've had the word Skoda on the back instead of the logo, and with the Elrok they've gone even further, because in the front, instead of the Skoda logo, there's also just the word Skoda. What's more, just like in the Enyaq, if I remember correctly, it's also on the steering wheel. Instead of the 3-spoke and instead of the Skoda logo, we have the word Skoda. So where should we look for the Skoda logo? Like I said, it's not a chicken, it's an arrow. So we have 5 such places, 4 of which we can see on the wheels, on the hubcaps. Here we have these arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th place is right in front of you. No, not yet, on the key. And here a quick charging test, fast charging. Here we have 139 kiloblalas. This charger gives a maximum of 140, so this car is basically drawing everything it can from it. The highest I've seen was around 144 kW, so I think we're in top shape when it comes to the battery's readiness to accept maximum power. The maximum is 175, but I just didn't have such chargers along the way. Or rather, at 44% and charging up to 80, I have to wait here for about 15 more minutes and then I can keep going. I've already mentioned that Elrok stormed onto the European charts, but it didn't necessarily do so with a super low price. Well, actually, it depends. The cheapest 170 horsepower version of Elrok 50 with a range of about 300 kilometers starts at 150,000. It's relatively cheap, minus the subsidies, but the range is quite a compromise. Moving on, Elrok 60 with 204 horsepower range, about 350 kilometers starts at 161,000. And it seems that this might be the more reasonable, cheaper version. Next, our test version, which is the Elrok 85 with 286 horsepower, 450 kilometer range, starting from 193,000. And finally, the 85X, which is all-wheel drive with the same battery for over 200,000. Meanwhile, at the very top of the table are the Rally Sport versions. Yes, Skoda hasn't forgotten about the Rally Sport models. 340 horsepower, 5.4 seconds to 100. And you can choose that distinctive bright mamba green paint. There the price starts at 219,000 Polish zloty. That doesn't sound too bad, but you have to keep in mind that these are the base prices of the mentioned versions. And for example, our tested 85 configuration today even exceeded that base RSA by over 20,000 Polish zloty, because the price of this car is exactly 44,000 Polish zloty. At this point, it's not that cheap anymore. And now the driving impression. Maybe since I'm leaving the charger, I'll say right away that the maximum charging power I managed to get here was 144 kW, while the fastest charger I used was 150 kW. So I suppose that under the right conditions you could get even higher, and the maximum is 175 if I remember correctly. As for fuel consumption or energy usage, in the city you can really get below 15 if you drive carefully in comfort mode. On the highway, depending on your speed, at 120 it's about 20 kW, while at 140 the consumption is a bit higher, around 24-28 kW. And then the range drops to just about 300 kilometers, so that's already a more expensive drive. Naturally, before I leave the parking lot, I'd like to show you something interesting. This car has an extraordinary turning radius. Even the numbers don't quite capture it because it's something below 11, but when we have this pole here on the left side, just listen. By the thickness of the paint. This car basically keeps the rear axle in one place, and now it's going to scrape, and for sure it's going to scrape. Yeah, now it's going to be scratches, and the front rotates around the rear axle, and the best part is it's just as maneuverable. In the all-wheel drive version, they managed to design the front suspension here. Excellent. And driving, I like cars that are really agile, light, easy to drive in the city, and on top of that without a rear wheel steering axle. So here just the tilt of the front wheels gives us a really easy and pleasant drive. And so I praised it and praised it again, but now it's time to criticize it a bit. The biggest problem with this car is two things. Let's say one is a bit of a stretch, but I'll mention it too. However, the main problem is braking. This car is optimized to use as little energy as possible during homologation test trials. And because of that, the braking process is a bit different than in other cars. And that's not just my opinion. We press the brake, we press deeper and deeper, and the car keeps going. It keeps trying to recover energy and doesn't let the traditional friction brakes kick in. And I get that because it really means that all the kinetic energy is converted back into electricity in the battery. However, the problem is that on the road, well, actually on the road it's not a big problem because on the highway we rarely have to stop. We just adjust our speed somehow. And that even makes sense because this way, by pressing the brake a bit more, we don't waste that energy. It just takes a little longer, but we recover all the energy. Great. However, in the city, if there's an emergency situation, this algorithm changes. So let's say I'm driving, I press, I come to a stop, great. We're driving through, I don't feel like anything is happening. Here, there's a car right in front of me, I press the brake, the bumper gets closer, and the car is still moving. I have to press the gas pedal much deeper for anything to happen here. And in my opinion, just like in any car, it takes some getting used to. However, I've already driven a few kilometers in this car and it still surprises me in the city. I still can't get used to it. And I understand where it comes from, but still I think it requires changing your habits. And we probably gain just a fraction of a kW per 100 kilometers from this, and it really doesn't serve any purpose. It's a pity that this algorithm isn't somehow adjusted even for the driving mode, because in comfort mode we have exactly the same thing, that rubbery braking, and in sport mode, if we approach faster, it basically looks the same. There's also an individual mode. We can set various things here, but never the braking mode. And that's interesting because I just switched from some Chinese car, another one. Which one? The braking mode was adjustable with 1% accuracy, and you could very precisely choose how the brake should work. Unfortunately, here they decided not to make this available as an option, and that's not very convenient when driving in the city. The next thing is the moose test. I don't have the conditions right now, but in a moment I probably will, and I'll do the moose test. And it seemed to me there's some big criticism, but that's actually an exaggerated flaw, I would say. It's not really a big criticism, but usually it seemed to me that electric cars, where most of the weight is, and this car is not light, 250 degrees 10 is concentrated somewhere just above the asphalt in the form of the battery. Under me, that during these maneuvers it should somehow smoothly go left, go right, recover. Especially at this speed, it's mass, because of course the mass comes into play, but at slightly higher speeds on faster curves, not at 50. Meanwhile, it's not able to do the moose test without the help of electronics. And basically, after the first move to the left, this car already starts braking, and returning to its lane looks just as unimpressive, meaning more braking. Generally, the chassis does what I tell it to, while the body leans a lot, which actually doesn't bother me, because it's kind of a natural consequence of having a comfortable suspension here, and we do have a comfortable suspension here, and that's nice. However, I expected that it would be able to perform this maneuver on its own, because many electric cars can do it, but this one somehow doesn't. And besides, we actually have a 50 here, 50 kilometers per hour. Exactly, and there was jerking, and that jerking isn't really a big surprise for me, but I assumed that nothing like that would happen. But still, these are of course just my subjective opinions, because in fact the car went around, I don't know, something suddenly appeared on the road and I had to go around it, and I did. And the fact that it braked with one wheel or the other, it decided that's better, okay. I expected that this wouldn't be okay. That's my problem, not his. He performed the maneuver, it's fine, let's move on. Power, 286 horsepower, that's a lot. And that's enough to have fun with this car as an electric. Not just because it's electric and cheap to drive, or because it's smooth, or because it's quiet, but also because it's pretty fast. It might not be that insane push into the seat, and honestly, when it comes to accelerating to 100, I can tell you right now, you won't get that either. However, it's pleasantly fast. Depending on whether you set it to comfort, normal or sport, that initial moment after you press the gas pedal changes in just the right way. So in sport mode, when you step on it, it really makes a sharp leap forward, but in comfort mode, when you step on it, the initial power delivery is a bit more subtle, a bit more stretched out over time, which is often useful when traveling with family, where no one feels terribly surprised that the driver decided to accelerate, sometimes without the intention of making everyone fly into the headrests. And that's something many electric cars can't do in a more subtle way. Here, the comfort mode and even the normal mode provide this kind of more subtle start even when you press the accelerator hard. And that's also quite well thought out. I should also add that the car is pretty well soundproofed. It might not be some super soundproofing package because we don't have double laminated windows and so on here. However, at 120 or even at 140, I wouldn't say that it's particularly loud in this car. I hear the wheels and the wheel arches more. There's more noise coming from underneath than from the wind. I think that aerodynamically everything has been handled so well that even the lack of bonded windows doesn't create any unpleasant effect that we have to raise our voices and shout to each other, whether it's by the road or while traveling on an expressway or on the highway. So for me, it's totally fine. And finally, I would never mention this in my life normally, but after testing a few Chinese ones in a row, I have to say it's so good to drive a car where the full set of assistance on board is here with us and will watch over us if needed. But most of the time we don't have to fight with them, we don't have to know or feel their presence in this car. The full set of these advanced driver assistance systems, supporting assistance, it's just there and watching, waiting for its moment, and that moment doesn't come and doesn't come because I feel free. I'm driving this car. I'm not fighting with all those assistants who think they know better, and that's not really thanks to Elrok or Skoda in particular. It's generally the result of such a contrast, switching from Chinese cars in which unfortunately, the assistants are much more active, and the number of important messages they send can sometimes be simply overwhelming. Here it's quiet and peaceful. Like I said, I didn't pay attention to it because it's natural and normal, but after testing several Chinese cars in a row, I'm starting to notice I really appreciate such little things, or maybe they're not so little after all. To sum up, the biggest advantages are the amazing maneuverability and driving comfort. And in my opinion, the parameters are more than sufficient when it comes to acceleration and overall speed on the road, as well as when it comes to soundproofing. Even though no one really put a special emphasis on it here, the result turned out to be very good. And now we can see the illumination at night, meaning the buttons on the steering wheel are lit up and everything around that is a physical button is illuminated. On the right side as well, those touch buttons under the screen are also illuminated, and we also have illuminated buttons on the right side, as well as the compartment underneath, the door pockets as you can see, and also the handles, which is also nice. And now the LEDs on the left side, as you can see, green on the right, red. Why? Well, for a very simple reason, these doors aren't closed. How many times have we had to wonder who didn't close the door? Why is this light on here, right? Interior lighting? Well, now the problem is solved. Of course, we could have looked here too, but not every car displays it exactly, so now there's no problem because you just need to see that the LED is red, close the door, and the LED turns green. Problem solved, and that's how it looks. And there's also a light by the mirror. Of course, that's there too. Agreed. Once again, we managed to build a practical, well thought out car that's actually quite pleasing to the eye. It's very simply clever and definitely feels more familiar than the Chinese competition. It has as many as 2 affordable versions, which combined with that practical dimension I mentioned, the fresh look and the safe familiar brand, probably gave Elrok the right kickstart for its sales. Of course, it's a pity that you have to pay so much for the better equipped versions, but unfortunately that's nothing new in European price lists. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Remember to subscribe and see you in the next videos. Bye.
Hey, smoke. Phew. Ow.